Hi, I'm Sami. I work at Idaho Education News.
I'm Nicole Foy. I work at the Idaho Statesman.
And we collaborated on a project that went for over a year
Mm-hmm.
on focused on Latino student outcomes in Idaho. It kind of all came about when I was lucky enough to get a fellowship from API focused on community engagement, and I knew I wanted to focus on Latino students. And one of the things that came up at one of our first trainings with API was, is there somebody in the community that you live in that is already doing the work that you want to do? Are you replicating work? Is there somebody that you could partner with as opposed to trying to redo the work somebody else has already done? And Nicole came to mind for me right away.
I had been covering, at that time, I had been writing about Latinos around Idaho on a variety of issues for a couple of years. And so when Sami approached me with this project idea, it seemed like an awesome way to collaborate because at the time, my newspaper also didn't have an education-focused reporter. And so it was really a cool and good idea for both of our outlets to partner together. We had a reporter who was covering Latino issues already and an education-only outlet that was already doing really deep policy work in that area.
So our goals around our project, really it was based on engagement. We really wanted to connect with Latino families around the state and learn about the ways that Idaho schools were or were not working for them. And we know from data that Latino student outcomes are below white student outcomes in most avenues, most school districts in the state. So we wanted to hear from them, like what could be better? How could Idaho schools be serving you better? We really wanted to bring a broader awareness of the achievement gap issue to Idaho policymakers in particular. But it was really about engaging with and highlighting the voices of Latino families.
Yeah, and so we really got to dig into doing a number of listening sessions without an agenda. We didn't even write stories out of some of these initial sessions. We did our best to meet with stakeholders in various areas and in various regions of the state just to ask them, we have this broad slate that we want to write about. What are things that you think are not being covered? Myths that you see that you would like to see busted? Or just stories that no one's ever asked you to tell before. And, that was everything from Latino parents to students to a great round that we did with teachers and educators. And it was really insightful so that once we started getting into those bigger picture stories and writing stories kind of first, I think our first story was just myth busting. This is what you need to know about Latino students, was really just drew from a huge amount of feedback and engagement that we felt really confident launching into this story.
So what worked well with our engagement efforts? Let me start with what didn't work well. When we tried to, so we covered the whole state here, and when we tried to go into a community where we didn't have a lot of connections and broadcast that we were going to have a listening session, we wanted to connect with parents, those really had not great attendance, even if we tried to broadcast for weeks beforehand. Really what we discovered worked well is partnering with agencies in the community that already have deep connections with Latino families. Once we explained our project to them, they were almost always willing to have us come in, connect with their families, and that was really where our greatest audience was. We also had good success with texting families in Spanish. Often they told us they would rather text than do email. A lot of families said they didn't have an email address that they checked regularly. And then we also did some live video sessions once the pandemic hit with a stakeholder in the Idaho Latino community, and I think those reached a lot of parents.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this project is in many ways, and just like for many people, the pandemic did derail a lot of the plans that we had for this project. I mean, we had a whole slate of listening sessions scheduled for the week our state shut down. And so that kind of had to change things, but it was really amazing to see how easy it was to switch to online engagement, which is really hard when you're covering a number of isolated communities across the state. But it was really great to see that not only did we already have the knowledge, but we had a ton of connections with stakeholders, which really is a good example of why you should be doing this type of engagement work always in your communities, is because a disaster or a big news item is going to affect some of these communities that you cover. And unless you put the work in ahead of time to get to know them, to get to, just make sure their voices are being part of the larger conversation, when that big news thing hits, or when you suddenly have your resources very much narrowed down, like we did during the pandemic, you're going to need those connections, and you're going to produce better stories if you've already been doing the work.